So without further ado,
okay, thank you. Thanks, Paul. I get to sit down. This is my first ever presentation where I have a seat, so that's nice. Steady the nerves. And yeah, since I imagined the Western imagination of Japan. I've never been to Japan. I've only practiced some Japanese martial arts to a very basic level of kendo and judo. I'm actually a practitioner of Wing Chun Kung Fu, but I've also studied some other martial arts as well. And then Paul kindly invited me to come and potentially present. I thought, well, how could I make it related to this event? And I thought, well, Japanese martial arts, I don't have any data or any studies on Japanese martial arts. My previous research has been on Chinese martial arts, and then when I lived in Mexico, with Mexican martial arts. But I thought, well, I have read some Japanese philosophy, and I thought, how can we fit in with the idea of the interdisciplinarity of martial arts studies, or the cross-disciplinary nature of these events? Okay, so how Japanese philosophy can fit or merge with a global sociology, or international sociology that's becoming. Okay. Yes, I'm part of Cardiff Met, so I was very happy that 3 of our universities are represented of that city. It seems like we've got a hotbed of martial arts activity. And I'm happy to be part of the sociology and philosophy groups, which though I'm very interested in, well, over the last few years, really, the links between sociology and philosophy, its different branches, such as phenomenology, Eastern philosophy, and various other ones. And we had some interesting discussions recently about morals and other types of philosophy. So yeah, lots of acknowledgements, and I apologise, Mike, I missed you out. So thank you very much for allowing me to come, and you guys for the social element, and my colleagues for covering me. So I actually forgot I had my monthly seminar with the first years, and they Lorenzo covered me, and Lisa as well. So thanks to them. So my aim essentially is try to argue the case for the potential of what we say, broadly speaking, could be Japanese philosophy. A lot of it could be really comparative and contemporary philosophy, and how that fits in with something that we now call as global sociology. Some may term it as post-colonial sociology or connected sociology. There are various terms that are emerging, even terms such as the Southern theory. There are debates about these terms. Okay, so it's going to have 3 short parts. One is to think about my limited knowledge of Japanese philosophy, my limited reading and application, in particular mind-body philosophies of Yuasa, if I pronounce that correctly. And also, I apologise for my poor pronunciation of Japanese. I've never studied the language. And then we'll talk about the recent arguments in sociology about a global, interconnected sociology, and then piece it together into what we've looked into martial arts studies in relation to this post-colonial or maybe even cosmopolitan view. And it's interesting to come at the end where I hear some of the short bios of the people. She was going to say Keiko. I thought she was going to say, "Oh, I'm cultural studies." I thought, no, it's like African American literature and English literature. I was like, okay. So this is an example of a cosmopolitan scholar from Japan looking at that. Yeah. So we have another example here, a German scholar in Belgium looking at Japanese things. So you see how internationally interconnected we are. Okay. So Japanese philosophy, reading about this quite recently, it seems there were debates in the early 20th century that either such a thing existed. So some claim that philosophy was a really European traditional activity from the ancient so-called genealogy from the Greeks. This is obviously a social construction. And others would argue, no, it's since the 5th century, since the beginning of Japan, there's been something we could call a philosophy if we deal with the idea of wisdom and knowledge and structure. Okay, so Nishida was one of the first philosophers who used the Western logical process to publish in that way. I would actually advocate that, for me, philosophy has been in all cultures. So having lived in Mexico, looking at the Maya, the Aztecs, you could say that they also had a philosophy. So it's not just a European tradition. So I agree with these quotes. Thomas Kasulis has translated many great books from contemporary ones. I do apologise also for lengthy quotes of some of these elements. So it says that there's epistemology, so there's a study of knowledge. There's an ethics, so how we deal with right and wrong. Aesthetics, the beauty. You could look at it in calligraphy and other arts, linking it, say, to Zen practice. Okay, metaphysics, reality, or the mind-body connections, or anything dualism, anti-dualist theory. Okay, so here, the second part of the quote, looking at the idea that it's a non-dualistic theory. It's not necessarily looking at aspects that what is this right or wrong, is this? It's more looking at a process. So I see here the focus on processes and interdependent processes as something that I can link with sociology. Because sociology is looking at processes such as modernization, globalization, and those kind of long-term shifting processes. They work together. Colonialization or decode colonialization, now we may term them. Okay, so And another point here, another kind of introductory quote, is that it's about constant change, much as say Bagua or other philosophies, or also in Aztec philosophy they talk about constant change, impermanence. And you said something's not always set in stone. That's an interesting foundation in martial arts too. So we see that these constantly changing traditions, that what we wear, how we practice, the terms we use. Okay. So Yuasa was the philosopher that I first encountered, actually my undergraduate, at the end of that, with my dissertation and an essay I wrote the third year. So, and it was written in 1987. And I see a period of 15-year shift in some connections here. So this is the first stage of the argument, is that this was translated often from the Japanese, so it was written fairly earlier in Japanese. And it was written for a Western audience later on in the translation of an argument of an Eastern mind-body theory, introducing the idea of how Eastern philosophers, or especially Japanese philosophy, as an amalgamation or a fusion of Indian, Chinese, Shinto and other native traditions. Okay? How we could see the mind-body connection through practice, and through this concept I noticed in another slide today, self-cultivation. So the cultivation, the development of the person through long-term sustained and disciplined practice, be it meditation, qigong, yoga and martial arts. So Yuasa does mention martial arts several times, or meditation and movement. In the second book, the Yellow Book, talks about the idea of key energy and different schemes of the body, from starting with phenomenology and the basic neurological understanding to the body, and the emotional to perhaps kind of some almost paranormal, supernatural. So Yuasa is interested in not necessarily the ordinary body, but more like the extraordinary body relationships of the mind, and the mind-body integration. So how mind and body may seem separate at first when you first learn a skill, but it's a long-term process of integration and development of knowledge. He says of total knowledge of all the body. So, knowledge of what your understanding are, reflective knowledge, deep consciousness, and other elements. So he used various disciplines to do that. He used depth psychology, phenomenology, neuroscience, various other things to add to his argument. Although he did not use social science per se, for example, sociology, education, or other tools which you could actually incorporate in that way. Okay. So, yes, it's not a distinct dualism or fixed dualism, back to the thing that we were always in constant change, but it's a correlative thing that can change over time. Okay, so later on, 2002, so the 15-year jump again, Osawa da Silva argued in MindBody Society, which is quite a big journal in sociology, but very difficult to publish in. Please, third time lucky, they might accept some of my articles, but it's a difficult one. One day I will get there. And so they're trying to talk about the idea that we need to look beyond European theories. So the theories of the body of Michel Foucault, Pierre Bourdieu, and then Merleau-Ponty. A lot of French names may occur there. And there are people from other cultures or civilizations and ways of thinking that could open our eyes to different forms of thought and perhaps could be applied or merged with sociology of the body. Okay. So you may notice her quote here. I selected certain words. It's a Eurocentric epistemology, so the form of knowledge is fairly European in the sense of its foundation. And it's perhaps saying, are we a body? So a lot in sociology of the body, they're often saying, we are changing bodies, this body. A lot of the textbooks will have chapters based on different types of body, technological bodies, hybrid bodies, cyborg bodies, sort of categorizing people into fixed things, entities. And they argue perhaps it's not really about what the body is, but what it can be, what's its potential, its possibilities as an open canvas. Okay, so it's not necessarily saying, are we a mind, are we a body, or are we both? It's like, perhaps for you as in other theories, we can ask different types of questions, about process-based questions, essentially. Okay. Sorry for the length of this quote. Simon actually, but George, I think at the end of the day, it's not a good idea to quote this block quote. I couldn't resist. I thought, no, it's too good. It's too good. But I'm not going to read it. I'll let you read it for 1 minute alone. So, shake your eyes. Okay. So some words that have been mentioned today, like creativity, you may see the artistic dimension, and you've got the standardized form or style. So you may look at a kata, a ritual, how it could later be creative through the individual. So we looked at the 3 levels in kendo. So we get to that 3rd stage. Is that where you start to be creative after a decade or 15 years, 20 years of training in this art? Could you start to create your own school of swordsmanship? Okay, so that's something that you could perhaps look into through the idea of lineage, through creation, through development. So you might have to have long-term historic shift. You may have to look at anthropology, using different disciplines to tackle this problem. Okay. So although there are creating potentially a dualism between Western and Eastern, that's another dualism of North and South. You could argue, and also I would bear in mind that the contemporary Japanese philosophy has used Western structures of their literature base, as well as their logical way of writing, or the academic way of writing. Okay, so hopefully you can see that in martial arts. So they use the baseball example. It could be done in a technique. So say Wing Chun, the basic punch. After doing hundreds of thousands of times, you could modify your own approach based on your experience. You think about how you could drill some other martial arts to be more creative in your pedagogy. So you can have an educational perspective, interactive, maybe using new forms of technology as well to improve that unity or maintain that unity over life. So that's something you also have to sustain. You have a high level of unity, but you could lose that. Perhaps it's reversible as well. There's a reverse process. So going global, so I've been looking around and okay, there are international associations like now martial arts studies and other things. There are other movements that calls for that in Europe as well. For example, we have a conference in July. There's another one at different dates. So they can go to that one as well, Paul. It's the Globalizing Japanese Philosophy. Okay, so you can see that that's a call there from European scholars and others to actually let's apply this, let's forward this, let's get people from all around the world together in one place. And even this year, actually it was in April, so last month, a new book was published collecting the idea of globalizing Japanese philosophy as an academic discipline, so calling it to be set next to European philosophy, Chinese philosophy. It's not just the traditional schools of the Greek, the Indian, and the Chinese as the mother of philosophy, but actually now we have calls for example, Aztec philosophy, forms of African philosophy, Native American philosophy. So the idea of comparative philosophy and what we can learn from that. Okay, so that's going global. However, if you look at sociology, when I recently taught the first years, a few months ago, I was inheriting some slides from my predecessor, and I saw that these are the sociologists. They've got the guys with big beards and great touch. Even Edward Barton Wright would be proud of their investment. And you think, well, this is great, because this was started obviously in the late 1800s in big cities, trying to understand modern societies, post-industrial age. Obviously, in London, Germany, and later in the United States, generally under the control of either white Europeans or people of European descent or Jewish descent as well in many cases, like Durkheim and Marx. And some women, actually, but the majority were men. Okay, so since that time, sociology has moved through different stages and is starting to incorporate thinkers from various countries and also outside the English or European languages over time. Okay. So there's an implication in a recent article. So there's an active, open, mutually beneficial and equal interaction between sociologists from different locations, countries and cultures in their joint efforts to comprehend, explain and improve the social world. So we have there the 3 potential activities of sociology to comprehend it, perhaps explain it in detail through theory, and potentially through critical theory or methodology or linking to policy potentially, and education. To improve. There's a potential transformative element there. Okay? And then some of them called for example, the idea of multiple modernities, which is essentially the modernity is the modern times, and the traditional kind of gospel of sociology was that it's 400 years ago in Western Europe that there was transformation from the industrial age, and theorists like Giddens have used it in their books, and reflexive modernization. But others have called actually no, there's been different types of modernization and change starting at different periods. Okay, and we start to look into how modernity has been experienced or is being experienced elsewhere. Okay, also looking at multicultural global sociology. So again, back to the language, back to the culture, how they understand these processes, and a global cosmopolitan approach. So here we are, how it is not just as a Western, Eastern, this dualistic thinking. Okay. However, it's not so simple, and there's another call that actually there are different types of sociologies. Okay. So Michael Borowoy is a British sociologist in Berkeley, California. Talks about there's a French sociology, and often there's a big divide between the British and American sociology. What I found coming back from Mexico is like people start, the American sociology is this, And because American sociology is dominated by statistics and more demographic studies, looking at large-scale samples, and British sociology has a strong tradition in more in ethnography and other qualitative traditions, smaller samples, rich data, and certain theorization as well. So you could look at those types of national sociology and see, actually, yes, there are definitely different types of sociology. I'm sure you can say about ethnology and anthropology as well. And then Bambara in Warwick, Bambara, talks about the idea that the missing element here is the colonialisation, the colony based in. For example, she used the example of Manchester and the Industrial Revolution, and they say, oh yes, the Industrial Revolution started in Manchester. This is this region, northwest England and other areas. But looking at the example of cotton, which is actually an Indian plant, was moved across the West Indies with the use of slaves, returned to Europe, to Manchester and Lancashire and those regions where it was milled, and then it was across the empire. You see this globalization, this movement of modernity didn't just start really in Manchester. It had to work on existing structures, existing movements and processes that occurred before that. So she's questioning the very foundations that we take for granted of some of the concepts of structure, class, etc., and some of the things that haven't been discussed by sociologists, particularly historical sociologists. So we actually can go start from the beginning and readjust the past and understand our history, to look at the present to actually shape a different future. That's her argument. Okay, so again, I had to break this big quote down, so I apologise. But there's some really good ones I found. Again, very current, 2017. So she's worked for the last 10 years on this, on post-colonial sociology. So again, it's saying, it started with the European origin of modernity, but that was become global. So that eventually this filtered out through their power, through their mechanisms, through this logic. Okay, and it's concerned with structures and processes in the social movements. Again, this word process comes in. Okay, so the idea is to try to rethink and think things differently. Her argument actually is to not just necessarily agree upon things, but use different types of sociology and different types of history to contrast and actually question almost everything, all the foundations of knowledge we have. So it's almost like formulating a new epistemology. Okay, so here we've got the idea that a lot of it comes from the global north. It's Western-centric and it's problematic. And there's a monopoly of knowledge about society from European theorists who've got perhaps even studied or they try to be universalized about their knowledge. For example, research in the United States or other countries that could be applied, or the idea that this interaction or this habitus or this thing is going to be the same everywhere. Okay, and perhaps we could look into their forms of knowledge and about their processes and the evidence from other types of sources as well. Okay, and I know there's another term, global south, which has been questioned as well because of the divide. Say, is Japan, is it the global north, is it the global south? We could question that. Okay, but I find at the end here about the idea of non-Western symbolic universes and cultural premises, and non-colonial languages. So English being obviously a colonial language, you see which countries speak English, say in Africa, and where they speak it as a second language for some of the, especially in the private school systems. Okay, so looking at here other forms of language, other forms of knowledge that could be used that previously may have been studied as an object of study, but not necessarily a form of knowledge. So say in colonial times of anthropologists going into an island, Polynesia, other regions, and let's study this group of people for their rites and rituals. But it's not sociological knowledge, it's just learning about this, why they're doing a sacrifice, whatever it is, a dance, and we'll critique this and create a theory, but not developing perhaps forms of knowledge about humanity or society. Okay, so that's what she's advocating here. So moving to, I know we had this earlier, so I'm going to quiz Paul. He must know his goal off by heart. So what is the goal of martial arts studies, Paul?
Blah, 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 linkages, networks, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, exactly. This is it, yeah. Almost there, yeah. Yeah, so we had this quite good that we had the quote earlier, actually. So to remind us at the end that it's to connect up disconnected disciplinary and cultural discourses by fostering dialogue and creating events, and to get us talking, really. So you've got, ethnologists, historians, philosophers, people in media studies, cultural studies, and there's one room, and you could feed in different ideas, different theories, concepts, okay, and set the agenda for future research, obviously with that future knowledge. So I use a little metaphor analogy of we're not set on the tracks. We can cross tracks. We don't have to stay on the same one. We always have different deviations, but it's nice at some points in the conferences and events, gets-togethers, or even online fora perhaps, we can actually cross and exchange information. Okay. Should prompt you for that quiz. Okay, so recently I thought, okay, let's see what's been done in regards, not just in martial arts, but in this idea of combining Japanese philosophy with sociology for creating theory or creating new methods. No direct results in the first search. The Japanese philosophy plus sociology, it came up, when you're searching Google Scholar, for example, it just had one sentence here, but nothing actually combining in a title, an abstract, or actually advocating it in a goal. And when I put Japanese philosophy plus global sociology, which admittedly is a new term the last 2, 3, 4 years, no results so far, so no one's actually tried to engage with that. Japanese philosophy plus sociology and martial arts, you probably find a lot more work from historians. So over the last few decades, even though they may have been published in sport sociology journals, they've been from a historical perspective on, say, the development of judo and use of Budo or the Bujitsu to Budo, this transformation, this change. But it hasn't been done in regards to social theory and using Japanese philosophy as a concept. So the concepts from Japanese philosophy, such as Budo, how can we use it in sociology? It's more just, we have to explain what Budo is in the introduction, and let them use Bourdieu or Elias's figurational sociology to explain this civilizing process, for example, of these martial arts. So that's what is a bit problematic, I would argue, that it's used as just an explanatory device for non-natives of Japanese, essentially. So we have come here with possibilities and challenges, so what we can do. So I think it is a rich possibility that we can understand the social processes, definitions, we can increase our vocabulary, our lexicon, our professional lexicon, okay, of using, cheers, good cameo as well. Should go through the suffragettes, the movements. Okay, and then using analysis and also cross-cultural analysis, perhaps learning from anthropology and other disciplines in that way, and also looking not just the everyday universal society, but the exceptional individuals. So there's a Japanese philosophy, at least the ones that I've read from Nagatomo, Yuasa, and other scholars, so looking at the attunement through the body, through long-term practice of yoga, meditation, whatever it is, energy work, holistic therapies. So what that is looking at the supernatural, something a bit beyond the normal. And sociology typically looks at what humans in general do. So could we unite that? Okay. On the counter side to that, you could say, is sociology already too complex? If you imagine a 7,000 or 8,000 word article, quite restricted in many ways when you've got your data, you've got to explain your theory, you've got to explain your methods. Could you actually empirically apply that? Because you've got to do the lit review, you've got to say, I'm going to use, for example, everyone uses Bourdieu these days. So Bourdieu with Yuasa, or Giddens or whatever, or Goffman. And it would be complicated. Perhaps it would be more of an essay, and then it would turn into a form of philosophy more than a form of sociology when you haven't applied it or tested it empirically. So that could be a big counterpoint to that. It's fairly difficult. It's already quite complex. There's so many theories out there. And it's like, oh my God, more theories or more books on theory. Maybe students would appreciate it. We've actually used it in some of our modules, and Simon's helped me out with some of the answers, non-dualistic theory in education. Okay. So essentially, you can say that there is fruitful potential and there's a rich possibility, but it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be overnight, and it has to be developed potentially theoretically, separately, methodologically, and then empirically in certain stages, I would argue. And another point is like, okay, is it post-colonial theory or sociology? If we're using different ideas of empires, was it the empire that perhaps was not involved with the slave trade, transatlantic slave trade, but it was, Japan officially still has an emperor, so is that post-colonial? So you could question this term as well, or is it just global sociology, global theory, or southern theory, but it's not in the south. So you might then question some of these terms and start to fit in the nuances of the situation. Okay. So could we then merge them together? Something I started in my PhD looking at traditionalist Chinese martial arts. Not this. I try to avoid the dirty word we say traditional. It's a word of trying to be traditional, but admitting actually you're not really traditional. Martial arts in Britain. And I tried to coin the term of shared cultivation. So I use Yuasa's idea of self-cultivation, but with sociology. So looking at how individuals are working together. So like these guys doing it at the long pole. Drilling together, doing sensitivity drills over a long period of time, over decades, building it, working as Kung Fu brothers and sisters for interactive work, sticky hands and leg, and with the teacher, obviously pushing the teacher to become better. You've got to create a circle of cultivation where the students can push the teacher, and you're developing a sustainable system for the next generation where the school and the lineage can continue. This is why I termed shared cultivation. And my recent work in Mexico is I lived in Mexico for 5 years. I encountered a martial art called Shilam. So it's a recently created martial art in the late 20th century, but you may notice in the background there are various things that look Aztec or pre-Hispanic. So some of their weaponry, their shields, their dress, and the rituals, the things they go about, the language, some of the terminology they use is pre-Hispanic or Mesoamerican. And here I'm starting to develop with some other colleagues a sense of idea of social cultivation. Because this martial art was not just developed for self-defense or sort of small-scale development, but it's an idea of a project for the nation, maybe perhaps a utopian project, but a project that, with the sense that being proud of your past and trying to develop a future in relation to the present and the past. Okay, developing a national, a stronger Mexico, a healthy Mexico, a safe Mexico, with all the problems that it has, obviously, as a developing country with lots of political changes going on as well. So that's something I'm trying to develop. But I'm using although I'm using the idea of cultivation for UASA, I'm also merging it with Aztec philosophy, which informs that martial art. So I've recently looked at the comparative philosophy of James Maffei and some other scholars who have looked at the archives and the writings and some of the translations and other recent ethnographic sources of this form of knowledge, and it really does link to what the teachings I have encountered in my own ethnographic study, documental study, and documentary analysis of some of the teachers of the founder. So it's interesting. I'm trying to mix, and I don't see that the Aztec philosophy that is that different to the idea of non-dualistic theory or even the Taoist philosophy as well, yin-yang. For example, they have a symbol there, the black and white, which actually is very similar. It's called Ome Teotl, so dual energy. Ome, say Ome. Ome is two. Teotl, energy, or God, it was translated by the Spanish. It's much like yin-yang in many ways. That's actually my last slide. So there's a few references from those three periods of the 1980s with the translated to English. You've got after that the call for MindBody theories, and then the recent global sociology. My home message, so the time is, as we become more international, social art theory, social art methods, social disciplines, what we grasp as a discipline, which we should encounter. I believe this is just one example of one type of philosophy that could be applied, not necessarily in Japanese martial arts, could be any martial art really. You can get my work in academia, and just recently got back into Twitter, so I haven't got a photo yet, so if you see a grey guy adding you, it's me, and I'll eventually add a new photo. And my email is there, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any quick questions? Comments?
Did I speak too quickly, guys? I think I was a bit the first language speakers. Yes, maybe.
There was a collection, a book, a collection called From something like Modernism to Postmodernism. This came out 10, 15 years ago. And in that book there was a chapter called, it was called something like Chinese Philosophy and Postmodernism.
Okay.
And it was really interesting. It was like the first one I turned to. And the argument was, and I remember this halfway through your talk, it was that Chinese philosophy has always tended towards postmodernism and Chinese philosophy are the same. That's what it argued. Okay. But this essay was removed from subsequent editions of the book because it was way too simplistic. And halfway through I was thinking, I'm into this, I'm into George's talk, and I thought, bang, is there something simplistic here? Is it just wherever we see the word change or mutation or anything like that, we can conflate?
Yes.
Is there a risk there that we can say anything is Japanese philosophy? Oh, look, that's been a bit of a change. There's been a bit of a necessary transition. Does that make us Chinese or Japanese philosophers, or is that too simplistic? I think if you're dealing with philosophy, dealing with the concepts. This is like the Tao or all these changes. You could employ some of these concepts with a way of looking at society, a long-term change and flexibility. And I think back to Chinese philosophy, a lot of all these philosophies are quite simple and should be common sense, should be understandable, because wisdom should be, be able to transmittable and understandable and comprehensible. Especially when you've got experience, you can reflect, what happened there? So I believe that it's not
it's a shame that was removed, but I think perhaps it also the logic of Taoist philosophy or Chinese philosophy, its simplicity, its logic is different. So I think Western philosophy we take 20 pages to actually explain maybe one thing, and perhaps I've had some graduates from philosophy say this, and it's like, you know, Chinese philosophy maybe is more direct in the way it's written in some of the classical texts. It's straight down through a few verses, and it's just trying to get you. Perhaps it's also the way it's writing. The rules of the game of academia is to make things really complicated and spend a lot of time to get into that. It could have been that as well, I think, that we were all guilty. Oh, you know, we played that game.
We're discussing that
Yeah.
text now.
Yeah.
Any other quick questions? Or are we all exhausted?
I'm from philosophy.
Yes.